Hey everybody, we're going to go through the next of these key documents. It's number 5 in these 25 documents, and it's called Brutus II. The 1-1 means the second, so it's the second letter that was written by Brutus. He wrote about 15 or 16 letters in total. This is the second one. Brutus was an anti-federalist. He did not see the need for a strong constitution. He did not want the country to be a federal country. He believed in the rights of the states to make their own laws. He wanted the Articles of Confederation to continue. He wanted every state to be independent. Now, we already read one of the Federalist Papers I think it was by Alexander Hamilton, and he was arguing that a strong central government is the only way to protect the freedoms of the American people. In some ways, this letter is an answer to what Hamilton was saying. Brutus is going to argue that strong central government will destroy the rights of the individual people. Now, I'm going to go through this letter like last time. I'll read it with you. I'll explain any vocabulary that's very important. And on every slide, there will be a summary down one side. And you should pause the video to write down the summary in your notebooks. So, to the citizens of the state of New York, he's writing to the people in New York. He wants the people in New York not to ratify the Constitution. I flatter myself that my last address established this position, that to reduce the 13 states into one government would prove the destruction of your liberties. He said in his last letter, he already explained that reducing the 13 independent colonies into one single government would destroy people's freedom, people's liberties. But lest this truth should be doubted by some, in case some of you don't believe this, I will now proceed to consider its merits. I will now explain it in more detail. Though it should be admitted that the arguments against reducing all the states into one consolidated government, consolidated means joined together, are not sufficient fully to establish this point, yet they will at least justify this conclusion, that in forming a constitution for such a country, great care should be taken to limit and define its powers, adjust its parts, and guard against an abuse of authority. So he says the arguments are not sufficient. He admits that the arguments are not yet enough. He wants to give a reason for his conclusion that it is not right to form this central government. And he also says care should be taken in how you explain the powers, how you negotiate between the different parts, the legislature, the executive, the judiciary, the states, and the federal, and how will you guard against, how will you protect an abuse of authority. How far attention has been paid to these objects shall be the subject of future inquiry. How much have people really thought about this? He says that people may not have thought about this enough, and future inquiry means a future letter will give more detail on this. When a building is to be erected, that means built, which is intended to stand for ages, the foundation should be firmly laid. So he's saying the country is like a building. You want the country to last for many years, so like a building, you need to make sure the foundation will be very strong. The constitution proposed to your acceptance, the constitution that you are asked to vote on, is designed not for yourselves alone, but for generations yet unborn. This is not just for you, but also for your children and your children's children and your children's children's children in the future. The principles, therefore, upon which the social compact, the social agreement between the government and the people is founded, ought to have been clearly and precisely stated. So the ideas must be explained very clearly, because this is going to make a change for the whole of history. and the most express and full declaration of rights to have been made. So there must be an express promise of the rights of the people. But on this subject, the people's rights, it is almost entirely silent. The Constitution doesn't explain about the rights of the people. Remember, compact is an agreement. If we may collect the sentiments of the people of America from their own most solemn declarations, most solemn means most serious declarations, what they said, they hold this truth as self-evident, that all men are by nature free. So this is from the Declaration of Independence. He says, if we accept that people believe they are free because they are human, no one man, therefore, or any class of men, means any group of men, have a right by the law of nature or of God to assume or exercise authority over their fellows. No one person or no group of people have the right to take authority, to take position over people, because everybody was created equal. The origin of society, then, is to be sought not in any natural right which one man has to exercise authority over another, but in the united consent of those who associate. So nobody has the right to take power. The authority comes from people agreeing. The united consent means the agreement of all the people. The mutual wants of men at first dictated the propriety of forming societies. People in the beginning just wanted to organize their communities. And when they were established, they needed protection and defense and pointed out the necessity of instituting a government. So they started out with their community, and then they realized that to protect themselves and to defend themselves, they needed a government. In the state of nature, every individual pursues his own interest. So naturally, everybody does what is best for themselves. In this pursuit, it frequently happened that the possessions or enjoyments of one were sacrificed to the views and the designs of another. So because everybody did what they wanted, some people would take from other people. Thus the weak were prey to the strong. If you were strong, you would take from the weak. The simple and the unwary were subject to the impositions from those who were more crafty and designing. So impositions are things that are placed on you, burdens that are placed on you. Those who are more crafty means more clever. So those who are simple or not educated were the victim of those who were more clever. In this state of things, every individual was insecure, so nobody had security. Common interest, therefore, directed that government should be established in which the force of the whole community should be collected, and under such directions as to protect and defend everyone who composed of it. So because of this, because of everybody wanting to do what was right for themselves, there needed to be a government, and the government would make a force who could protect the whole of the community. The common good, therefore, is the end of civil government and common consent, the foundation on which it is established. The end means the goal. It doesn't mean finishing it, it means the goal. So the common good, to protect everyone, means we need to have a goal of government and agreement for the government to operate. To this effect, which means in order to secure the protection for everybody, it was necessary that a certain portion, a certain amount of natural liberty, of people's freedom, should be surrendered in order that what remained should be preserved. People need to give up some of their freedom so that the rest of their freedom is protected. How great a portion of natural freedom is necessary to be yielded by individuals when they submit to the government, I shall now inquire. How much freedom do people need to give up? How much power should the government have? So much, however, must be given up as will be sufficient to enable those to whom the administration of the government is committed to establish laws for the promoting the happiness of the community and to carry those laws into effect. People need to give up enough freedom that the government have the power to make laws to protect people's happiness and freedom. But it is not necessary for this purpose that individuals should relinquish, that means give up, all their natural rights. Some are of such a nature that they cannot be surrendered. Some natural rights are so important that people cannot give them up. Of this kind are the rights of conscience, knowing right and wrong, the right of enjoying and defending life. You cannot give up your life for that. Others are not necessary to be resigned in order to attain the end for which government is instituted. These, therefore, ought not to be given up. To surrender them would counteract the very end of government, to wit, the common good. Some rights don't need to be given up, so the government should not take them. From these observations, it appears that in forming a government on its true principles, the foundation should be laid in the manner I before stated. By expressly reserving to the people such of their essential natural rights as are not necessary to be parted with. Therefore, people should keep their rights that the government does not need. The same reasons which at first induced mankind to associate and institute government will operate to influence them to observe this precaution. So, for the same reason that people made a government to protect themselves, they will also follow this idea that they don't need to give up too many rights. If they have been disposed to conform themselves to the rule of immutable righteousness, immutable means cannot change, government would not have been requisite. So if everybody had been perfectly good, the government would not have been required. It was because one power exercised fraud, oppression, and violence on the other that men came together and agreed that certain rules should be formed. So it's because some people were bad, that they oppressed the other people, that the community decided a government was needed to regulate, to control the behavior, the conduct of all, and the power of the whole community lodged in the hand of rulers to enforce an obedience to them. So in order to protect the whole community, the community gave power to a group of leaders. But rulers have the same propensities as other men. Propensity means natural desire. So people are naturally want to do bad things. Leaders also naturally want to do bad things. They want to get rich. They are as likely to use the power with which they are vested for private purposes and to the injury and oppression of those whom they are placed over as individuals in a state of nature are to injure and oppress one another. Because men also are men, and they also have bad tendencies, they are just as likely to try and oppress people as everybody else. It is therefore as proper that bounds should be set to their authority as that government should have at first been instituted to restrain private injuries. Therefore, just like the government is needed to protect the people, there is a limit needed on the power of government to also protect the people. This principle, this idea, which seems so evidently founded in the reason and nature of things, which seems natural to everyone, is confirmed by universal experience, by what everybody knows. Those who have governed have been found in all ages ever active to enlarge their powers and abridge, limit the public liberty. So throughout history, those who have ruled have tried to make their power more and limit people's freedom. This has persuaded the people in all countries, where any sense of freedom remained, to fix barriers against the encroachments, the encroachments like going into something that's yours. So to make a limit to the grabbing of power by their rulers. The country from which we have derived our origin, Britain, have long been the boast, as well as the security of that nation. Is an eminent example of this. So Great Britain has limited the power of the king for many years. Their Magna Carta and Bill of Rights have long been the boast as well as the security of the nation. So England was proud of the Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights, and that is what gave security to the people. I need say no more, I presume to an American, than that this principle is a fundamental one, a very important one, in all the constitutions of our own states. There is not one of them but what is either founded on a declaration or Bill of Rights, or has certain express reservation of rights interwoven in the body of them. So all the state constitutions have laws protecting people's freedoms, protecting people's rights. For this it appears that at a time when the pulse of liberty beat high, and when an appeal was made to the people to form constitutions for the government of themselves, it was their universal sense that such declarations should make a part of their frames of government. So when people wanted liberty, when people wanted freedom, everybody agreed that they needed to protect the freedom of people. It is therefore the more astonishing that this grand security to the rights of the people is not to be found in this Constitution. Therefore, it is amazing that this US Constitution does not protect people's rights. And incidentally, this is why the first 10 amendments to the Constitution were made, the Bill of Rights. The anti-federalists were arguing that the Constitution focused only on the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, that the people's rights, their freedoms, were not protected by the Constitution. And so some states said they would only agree to the Constitution if the Bill of Rights was added at the same time. That's why the first 10 amendments focus on people's individual rights. It has been said, in answer to this objection, that such declaration of rights, however required they might be in the constitutions of the states, are not necessary in the general constitution. So some people say the states need this, but the federal constitution does not need this, because in the former case, in the states, everything which is not reserved is given. But in the latter, the reverse of the proposition prevails, and everything which is not given is reserved. So in the states, it says, unless the constitution of the state gives the power, the freedom to the people, then the government can take. But in the US Constitution, it's the opposite. Everything that's not given to the government stays with the people or the state. Reverse means to be opposite. It requires but little attention to discover that this mode of reasoning is rather specious than solid, that it's not very strong. The powers, rights, and authority granted to the general government by this Constitution are as complete with respect to every object to which they extend as that of any state government. This argument is wrong, because this federal Constitution is going to give very complete powers to the federal government, just like in the state. It reaches to everything which concerns human happiness. Life, liberty, and property are under its control. There is the same reason, therefore, that the exercise of power in this case should be restrained within proper limits, as in that of the state governments. So just like the state government limit their power and protect people's freedoms, this federal constitution also should limit their own power and protect people's freedoms. To set this matter in a clear light, permit me to instance some of the articles of the Bill of Rights of the individual states and apply them to case in question. So he's going to look at some examples from the states. So for the security of life, to protect people's lives in criminal prosecutions, the Bill of Rights of most of the states have declared that no man shall be held to answer for a crime until he is made fully acquainted with the charge brought against him. He shall not be compelled to accuse or furnish evidence against himself. The witnesses against him shall be brought face to face, and he shall be heard by himself or counsel. This is essential to the security of life and liberty. So he says, in criminal prosecutions, when people are put on trial, most of the 13 colonies have said no man should be on trial until he knows the charge is against him. No man can give evidence against himself, be forced to give evidence against himself. And the witnesses must give their testimony face to face. This protects people's life and their freedom. It protects their freedom because they cannot be sent to jail falsely, and their life because they cannot be executed for a crime they did not commit without a fair trial. That trial of facts be in the vicinity where they happen. So the trial must happen where the crime was committed. Are not provisions of this kind as necessary for the general government as in that of a particular state? So these things are needed for the 13 colonies. Why are they not needed for the whole government? The powers vested in the new Congress extend in many cases to life. They are authorized to provide for the punishment of a variety of capital crimes. Capital means a crime that you can be killed for. And no restraint is laid upon them in its exercise, save only that the trial of all crimes, except in cases of impeachment, shall be by jury, and such trials shall be in the state where the said crime should have been committed. So it says, no restraint is laid upon them except. This is the only part of the Constitution that is about the jury trial. No man is secure of a trial in the county where he is charged of committed a crime. He may be brought from Niagara to New York, or carried from Kentucky to Richmond for a trial for an offence supposed to be committed. What security is there that a man shall be furnished with a full plain description of the charges against him? That he shall be allowed to produce all proof he can of his favour? That he shall see the witnesses? So this is saying, unless there is a change to the constitution that is proposed, people are not safe. The trials may be unfair. They may be put in prison for a long time or killed for something they haven't committed. There needs to be a change. There needs to be extra protection for the people's liberty. And then, for the security of liberty, it has been declared that excessive bail should not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel or unusual punishments inflicted. That all warrants without oath or affirmation to search suspected places or seize any person, his papers or property are grievous and oppressive. So these are from the state government. These provisions are as necessary under the general government as under that of the individual states. So these are what the states normally include in their state constitutions, but they are necessary for the general government. For the power of the former is as complete to the purpose of requiring bail, imposing fines, inflicting punishments, granting search warrants, and seizing persons, papers, or property in certain ways as the other. Both the state government and the federal government have the same power over these issues, so people need the same protection for these issues. For the purpose of securing property of the citizens, it is declared by all the states that in all controversies at law respecting property, the ancient mode of trial by jury is one of the best securities of the rights of the people and ought to remain sacred and inviolable, cannot be stopped, cannot be objected to. So the states all agree that if somebody might lose their property, then there should be a trial by jury first. Does not the same necessity exist of reserving this right under this national no compact as in that of these states. So don't the federal government need to give the same right? People could lose their property because of the state government, or they could lose it because of the federal government. But they don't have any rights protected in the Constitution for the federal government. Yet nothing is said respecting it. In the Bill of Rights of the states, it is declared that a well-regulated militia is the proper and natural defense of a free government. That as standing armies in time of peace are dangerous, they are not to be kept up. So you don't have a normal army, you have a militia, a group of people that can be called upon very quickly to defend you. And the military should be kept under strict subordination to and controlled by the civil power. So the states all say that there should be a militia to protect people against the government and to protect people against other threats. And Brutus is saying the same security is as necessary in this constitution, and much more so, for the general government will have the sole power to raise and to pay armies, and are under no control in the exercise of it. Yet nothing of this is to be found in this new system. So he's worried the new government has the power to raise an army. So who will protect the people from the army of the government? I might proceed to instance a number of other rights, which were as necessary to be reserved, such as that elections should be free, that the liberty of the press should be held sacred. But the instances adduced are sufficient to prove that this argument is without foundation. So he could talk about other things, that elections should be free, that the liberty of the press, the freedom of the press should be protected, but he said it's not necessary. Besides, it is evident, it is clear, that the reason here assigned was not the true one. Why the framers of this constitution omitted a Bill of Rights? Why did they not include a Bill of Rights? If it had been, they would not have made a certain reservations, while they totally omitted others of more importance. So why didn't they do this when they put other things in that are less important? We find they have. In the 9th section of the first article declared that the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless in cases of rebellion, that no bill of attainder or ex post facto law shall be passed, that no title of nobility shall be granted by the United States. So he's saying that there are some things that link to the rights of the people. These are not as important as the freedom of the press, that the right to trial by jury. These things are not as important, but they are in the Constitution. If everything which is not given is reserved, what propriety is there in these exceptions? So he says, if everything that is not given, every power that is not given to the government is reserved, why did they need to include these things that the government does not have the power to do? Does this constitution anywhere grant the power of suspending the habeas corpus, to make ex post facto laws, pass the bills of attainder, or grant titles of nobility? It certainly does not in express terms. The only answer that can be given is that these are implied in the general powers granted. So there's nothing explicit about these. With equal truth, it may be said that all the powers which the Bill of Rights guard against the abuse of are contained or implied in the general ones granted by this Constitution. He is worried that you could get an assumed power. By looking at the powers that are given to the government, they could assume more power unless there is a Bill of Rights. Unless there are laws which protect people, the government might take extra laws for themselves. So far it is from being true that a Bill of Rights is less necessary in the general constitution than those of the states. The contrary is evidently the fact. It is not true that a Bill of Rights is less necessary. It is clear that a Bill of Rights is more necessary in this general constitution. This system, if it is possible for the people of America to accede to it, to agree to it, will be an original compact. and being the last will, in the nature of things, vacate every former agreement inconsistent with it. So this will be the highest law. Anything that does not agree with it will be cancelled. For it being a plan of government received and ratified by the whole people, all other forms which are in existence at the time of its adoption must yield to it. Because this has been agreed by the whole country, anything else is lower than this constitution. This is expressed in positive and unequivocal terms in the 6th article, that this constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuant thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the constitution or in the laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. So he's saying even the 6th article of the constitution makes this clear. This is the highest law of the land, and any law in any state that does not agree with it must be cancelled. The senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures, and all executive and judicial officers both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by an oath or affirmation, by a promise to support this constitution. Every state officer and every federal officer must promise to uphold this constitution. It is therefore not only necessarily implied thereby, but positively expressed, that the different state constitutions are repealed and entirely done away with, so far as they are inconsistent with this, with the laws which shall be made in pursuance thereof, or with the treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States. So it is therefore shown clearly that any state constitution, any state law that does not agree with this constitution will be cancelled. So, of what avail will be the constitutions of the respective states to preserve the rights of the citizens? So, what chance do the state constitutions have to protect people's rights? Should they be plead, the answer would be the Constitution of the United States and the laws made in pursuance thereof is the supreme law, and all legislative and judicial officers, whether of the general or state governments, are bound by oath to support it. So, if the federal government made a law which took away people's freedom, well, that would be made following the rights that they have from the US Constitution. Therefore, the state would have no power to protect people's rights because the federal government would have made a higher law. No privilege reserved by the Bill of Rights or secured by the state government can limit the power granted by this or restrain any laws made in pursuance of it. So there's no chance for any state law to block a law that is made under the US Constitution. It stands therefore on its own bottom and must receive a construction by itself without any reference to any other. So this is the one that stands by itself. It is not under anything else. It is the top law of the country. And hence, it was of the highest importance that the most precise and express declarations and reservations of rights should have been made. Therefore, because this is the highest law of the country, it is right that it should make some guarantee to protect people's freedoms. This will appear the more necessary when it is considered that not only the Constitution and laws made in pursuance thereof, but all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States and the supreme law of the land, and supersede the constitutions of the states. The power to make treaties is vested in the President by and with the advice and consent of 2/3 of the Senate. So even more, this Constitution gives the right to make treaties to the President. And so he can take away people's freedom by making treaties. I do not find any limitation or restriction to the exercise of this power. There's nothing to stop the President. The most important article in any constitution may therefore be repealed. So any state constitution that protects people's rights may be repealed, even without a legislative act. Ought not a government vested with such extensive and indefinite authority to have been restricted by a Declaration of Rights? Because this government has such large power, shouldn't they be limited by a declaration of the rights of the people? It certainly ought to be. It should be limited. So clear a point is this, that I cannot help suspecting that persons who attempt to persuade people that such reservations were less necessary under this constitution than those of the states are willfully endeavoring to deceive. They are really openly trying to deceive, to trick, and to lead you into an absolute state of vassalage. Vassalage means to be like a servant. So he's saying, because there is no Bill of Rights in this constitution, he thinks people are trying to trick the population so that the federal government take a lot of power and the people will be like servants under the government. Basically, this whole of this letter is complaining that the Constitution does not protect people's rights. The states currently protect people's rights, but the states will be under the federal Constitution. So because there is nothing to protect people's rights, he is against the Constitution.